Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again on the State of Freedom.
The State of Freedom is a listener-supported podcast. We're committed to pursuing the truth about policymaking, decisions, and situations in Louisiana and at the national level that stand to impact our freedoms.
Please become a monthly supporter of the State of Freedom at freedomstate.us as we continue to expand the voice of liberty across Louisiana and beyond.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am rolling solo today. My fearless co-host, Chris, is fighting the good fight. Rest assured, he is out there ruffling rhino feathers, but he couldn't be with us for this one. Just a few housekeeping notes here. If you haven't heard, we're now live streaming the show on YouTube, Rumble, and X. On Rumble, you can find us by searching TSOF Podcast. I don't think a search for the State of Freedom brings up the right channel, so remember that, TSOF Podcast. And we have moved the show to a Tuesday-Thursday schedule. We haven't settled on a regular time yet, so just be sure and click the notifications for when we go live. If you're joining us on any platform besides Rumble, YouTube, and X, the show will be released there the day after we go live, so Wednesdays and Fridays. Well, it is my absolute pleasure to have Will Chamberlain with us today. Will is a senior counsel at the Article 3 Project, and before joining AP3, he worked as a class action litigator, which I would love to talk to you offline about. I have so many ideas for that. He also worked for Governor Ron DeSantis, both in his presidential campaign and his executive office. And we're so pleased to have him with us today. We're going to be talking about the lawfare against President Trump that remains in play with Judge Juan Merchan in New York, and the weaponization of the judicial system against upstanding American citizens. Before we get into that, let me read the scripture of the day. It's Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10. And it says, "We have become his poetry, a recreated people that fulfill the destiny he has given each of us. For we are joined to Jesus, the Anointed One. Even before we were born, God planned in advance our destiny and the good works we would do to fulfill it." And last night I was just meditating on Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 through 6. It's a very familiar verse. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will make your path straight." And I was wondering, as I was laying in bed, what it looks like to truly acknowledge God in everything I do, to yield to God in everything I do. And as I read this passage this morning, Ephesians 2:10, it was like Holy Spirit said, this is it. This is what it looks like. It looks like our lives being the poetry of God, moving forward steadily and unwaveringly in the good works he planned for us in advance. And as we say so often on this show, our destiny being fulfilled is dependent on yielding to his spirit, following his promptings and voice, and really doing what it is he calls us to do. And Will, welcome to the show. Welcome to the State of Freedom. I'm so happy to have you with us. And it seems clear to me that if you're at the Article 3 Project, you are walking in the world of doers and not just talkers. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, we are here 11 days out from President Trump taking office, and the last holdout of ongoing lawfare against him refuses to stop pressing forward. Judge Juan Merchan is insisting on sentencing President Trump tomorrow, I believe, and news just came out even late this morning that the appellate court in New York is backing him up and allowing the sentencing to move forward. Now, I'm a bit at a disadvantage because Chris, my co-host, is the legal mind on this show, but would you mind reminding us the premise of this case? I think it was the hush money case, and tell us where things stand.
Yeah, so I mean, he was convicted of 36 counts of falsification of business records. The thesis being that he instructed his accountants to record the payments made to Stormy Daniels as legal expenses, and then that was false and therefore a felony. It's an extremely bizarre theory for a variety of reasons. It doesn't pass the smell test in terms of like why would Trump be involved in the exact categorization of this expense? Like, we're literally talking about clicking the wrong thing on a drop-down menu and click in QuickBooks.
Yeah.
That's the alleged crime here. The query whether or not a legal expense is the logical way to account for an NDA expense. Like, if you get somebody to sign an NDA, that seems legal in the sense that you've signed a binding contract about it. So it doesn't seem intuitive that would be false off the top of your head. And then it's a bizarre charge also because there's no victim. Normally, falsification of business records, it's done to induce reliance on someone's part. It's a slightly easier crime to prove than fraud because fraud has 6 different elements, and sometimes not every single element of fraud is meant. But you wouldn't normally see a charge like this unless there was some sort of victim, somebody who was going to be deceived by the falsity of these business records. But it's pretty clear no one would have ever looked at them but for Tish James and Alvin Bragg deciding to, undertake an all-out legal war against President Trump and bring in every single document from him and his organizations as they could, and then finding something to pin a charge on him. So, from the get-go, this was kind of a ridiculous case. Even legal analysts who thought that the other charges against President Trump had merit looked at this one and said it was the most frivolous prosecution of the bunch and should not have been brought. And yet it's the only one that there ever was a conviction for, probably because it was brought first, and because it was done in New York court rather than in federal court, where there's a lot more protections that President Trump was able to avail himself of. So there's a lot of different, legal problems with this. And, if and when it gets to an appeal, I think President Trump will pretty easily prevail and get the conviction thrown out. But what Juan Merchan is trying to do right now, he's trying to essentially protect the underlying jury verdict. There's not really any hope of actually punishing President Trump. In his order, announcing that he would do the sentencing tomorrow. He tipped his hand and said, we're going to probably do an unconditional discharge, which means no punishment. No conditions, no probation, no jail, no fines, nothing, no punishment. But it just does mean that the conviction stands. He's not throwing out the jury verdict. That's not going to be good enough for Trump, and for good reason.
Yeah.
And I think, one second, let me turn on Do Not Disturb really quickly. And there you go. But that's not going to be good enough for Trump. Trump wants this verdict thrown out for good reason. And I think that's the most likely outcome here, is that you're going to have a stay of sentencing by the Supreme Court. I think they're going to step in and stop this. And then once that happens, I think ultimately there will be an appeal on the immunity issue. And I think ultimately this will all get tossed out before there's any chance to sentence President Trump.
Got it. Well, that's so encouraging, because I read this quote this morning from the recent filing, and Judge Merchan said, this is the quote, "There is no risk here of an extended proceeding that impairs the discharge of the defendant's official duties he does not possess before Jan 20, 2025 in any event. My reading of that as so what I was thinking of when I was reading that was just that the proceeding may not interfere, but the consequences of the proceeding could certainly interfere."
I mean, it's possible, right? That's one of the reasons I think they want to stop the sentencing, just because it's not guaranteed that Judge Merchan is going to follow through on what he suggested in his order, right? He didn't bind himself to doing this unconditional discharge. He didn't. So theoretically, he could try to throw President Trump in jail. I don't think he would. I think that he knows that would immediately get stopped, right? Like almost instantly.
Okay.
So I think that, that's why it's not just because he's thinking about an unconditional discharge. I don't think he's going easy on President Trump. Like, I think there's no real way in which he could impose any type of punishment on the president-elect without running into the obvious supremacy clause problem, which is the states do not get to defeat the functioning of the federal government. That's a general principle of how our system works, right? States have their areas of authority, but where the federal government has authority, states do not get to interfere, do not get to thwart the federal government. And so that otherwise you would see something like this, where a local state prosecutor could arrest the president of the United States and convict him. That obviously can't be right in our system. So I don't think he had any. I think he's going for the most he can do, which is just to sentence him and uphold the jury verdict while not actually punishing President Trump.
So take it right up to the line and inflict the maximum pain and anxiety without actually getting himself in trouble.
That could be legally upheld, right? That wouldn't immediately get reversed. That's the idea. They're going for as much as they think they can reasonably get. And in this case, all that is upholding the conviction.
So when we're thinking about, okay, Trump has obviously been persecuted just beyond anything we could possibly think of as normal. What do you think happens to these judges, right? Like the judges, the DAs, these corrupt officials who have not just weaponized the legal system, but have literally flouted the law itself in pursuit of some political vendetta. Or, if you look at some of these average everyday citizens, you look at the J6ers who are being held in just egregious manner. I think about Tina Peters. I know hers is a state case, but she's being held. She's in jail right now in Colorado for her work on election integrity for the people of Colorado. What do you think comes of these people?
A good number, for at least for the federal charges, I think a good number of people, the majority are going to get pardons. I suspect that if you actually look at what President Trump is going to do, he's going to, sever out people who were actually like violent towards law enforcement on that day. And that's not a big number, right? I would be surprised if that's more than double digits, right? There's probably, but, and I'm not particularly sympathetic to anybody who swung at a cop, for example.
Right.
If you did that on J6, sorry, that's a crime in any world. Yeah. That's not a thing that's okay. And really, those specific individuals are probably most to blame for the fact of the overwhelming reaction towards everybody else. The people who just walked into the Capitol, they're the ones who brought all the opprobrium onto the entire group of protesters. So I'm not particularly sympathetic to anybody who swung at a cop.
Yeah.
That said, I think everybody else, the 2,000 other people who weren't violent on that day, they're going to get pardons. And I think that's good. And I think that's right. Now, people like Tina Peters, who I think was convicted on state charges in Colorado, I actually don't think President Trump can do much there. I don't think he has the legal authority, and I don't think anything is coming because, it's a state prosecution. It's up to the governor of the state of Colorado to pardon or not. So that's just kind of like that's one of the other way our system works. But I think for the vast majority of people who are in prison on charges stemming from January 6th, I think the vast majority of those people get pardons, and that good.
And I heard Steve Bannon say a couple weeks ago, I think this was during Charlie Kirk's big thing in Arizona, that he would be recommending to President Trump that he withhold all federal funds from the state of Colorado until Tina Peters is released. Is that something that you could foresee happening, that kind of political pressure?
I doubt it. I'm not as familiar with the Peters case as others, so it kind of, I need to I know it's like a different set of facts and circumstances. Sure. That's very aggressive. So I don't know that he's going to do that. But it's certainly in his tool of options, right? There are ways in which the federal government can put a lot of pressure on the states, and certainly cutting off funding is one of them. I just don't. I wouldn't. Right. Yeah. But I wouldn't presume that he's going to do that in the Peters case. And I'm just not familiar enough with it to say that this is such an obvious and clear injustice that it needs that dramatic of a remedy.
Yeah.
So.
And y'all are working on Kash Patel's confirmation, I believe. Do you think that Kash, if and when, God willing, he gets in, will be going after these federal judges and some of these prosecutors who have?
I think he's more likely to go after the prosecutors than the judges. Judges have broad judicial immunity, so it's extremely hard to prosecute a judge for decisions that they made in their judicial capacity. There's just a blanket immunity, and I don't think any court is really going to tolerate even being well, his motives were bad. They're just immune. If they were acting as a judge, they're immune. We're not going to look under the hood. The prosecutors, on the other hand, there's malicious prosecution charges. You're not allowed to deprive people of rights under color of law, and you're not allowed to conspire against people's civil rights. And I think a lot of these prosecutors did indeed do that. I think that the way they've discharged their duties is offensive, and I think that thing that Kash Patel will certainly look at.
Got you. Now, what is Article 3 project? What is the work that you're doing to get good justices, good judges, good prosecutors, perhaps even in place to restore some semblance of justice?
Well, I mean, I guess we work at two different levels, right? We work behind the scenes to try and influence who is picked. We have our ideas of who would be good, and so we try and work, with Team Trump and with other, prominent organizations to support candidates we think are good behind the scenes so that they're picked. Once they're nominated, we work very hard in social media space, in hits like this one, on podcasts, on television, and with email and phone campaigns to pressure senators to confirm the nominees that are selected. That's a big part of what we're doing right now with President Trump's cabinet appointments. If you'll recall, maybe 6 weeks ago, there was a lot of talk about Pete Hegseth's nomination being on the rocks.
Yep.
And that's not the case anymore. It looks like Hegseth will sail to a smooth confirmation. And a large part of that, I think, is due to a very aggressive campaign to get people to contact their senators directly using our email platforms. We make it very easy for anybody to just click once or twice, and that has you send an email to your senator. Not every senator, your senator, the one in your state, which, we have a lot of people with experience in Senate offices on our staff, like Mike Davis, for example, worked for Chuck Grassley, and others on our team have worked in Congress and on the Senate. And what they'll tell you is that the thing that really moves the needle for these legislators, for senators especially, is hearing from constituents who vote for them and what they want. That gets their attention. So with a few clicks, we make it very easy to look at those people.
And Will, you've been involved in politics for a little bit. I spent a long time in DC. I lived there for 14 years. I have never seen the public more engaged, more outraged, more ready to let their legislators know exactly how they feel. Are you experiencing that? Do you feel kind of the heat, the fire from the bellies of the people?
Yeah, I think that in many ways, the Trump movement is more mature than it was 8 years ago. I think that's the way to think about it. We've built more muscle. The people are, both in terms of the organizations around Trump, they're more experienced, they're more well-funded, they've built a lot of more institutional knowledge about how to get things done. Voters, some Trump supporters, are more sophisticated about activism, about how to get the attention of their legislators. And so I think and what that kind of power, everybody really kind of flexed their power a little bit when you started reading those news reports about Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard and other people maybe not getting through confirmation, Kash Patel, that very quickly the organizations behind Trump and Trump supporters broadly made it clear that they were not going to tolerate that. And that very quickly you saw people like Joni Ernst pulling back from some of her statements and trying to get quickly on board because they realized it's not 2016 anymore. In 2016, Trump's victory was a bit of a surprise. He was dealing with the organizations that existed were these establishment organizations that weren't always on board with him. And just in general, the movement was less mature. And so it wasn't able to kind of bully senators in the same way, in a disciplined way. And I think that's changed a lot. And I think for the good, it's going to make Trump's second term, I think, much more effective than his first term.
I think so too. I think saying that the Trump movement is a lot more mature is a great way of saying it, because I also think that a piece of that is the people don't trust the media anymore. So the headlines move people in a far different way now than they did in 2016 or even 2020. I think we all look at the news, mainstream especially, with skepticism, and we're all prone, for better or for worse, to probably think the worst of what our legislators' intent is. And that moves people to action.
Yeah, and I think that it's not merely that we pay less attention to it, it's that I think we've demoralized the progressive left in a lot of ways. I don't see the same level of protest or vitriol that I saw in 2016. They were much more engaged, the resistance, everybody ready to fight the incoming Trump administration. That's gone. I don't see it at all.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think that Elon Musk buying X, I think, is actually a major cultural turning point in this regard, because there was a huge infrastructure and industry built up to try and censor conservatives, and that was funded by Soros and many other progressive nonprofits, funded by many other progressive donors. Is that really that useful or effective in a world where you can't actually get somebody kicked off a platform? No. And so there's no payoff anymore for all the censorship stuff, for all the endless neener reporting that HuffPo and all those cruddy liberal rags do. So there's just no energy to do that stuff anymore. And Trump's not going to get impeached again, absent something insane. There's no world of conviction. You're not going to remove him, and he's not going to run again, right? This is the second and final term. So if you're sitting there as a progressive activist who's been running with this never Trump engine for 10 years, okay, well, but now what? What's the point anymore?
It's true. It's so tired. I was looking at X this morning, and the narrative on the left this morning was people hand wringing and saying, the California's burning and our government officials aren't responding, and Trump is here criticizing them when he could be doing something. And I'm like, well, technically he can't be doing something because he's actually not president yet. And secondly, obviously, if you're saying that this is all a tool of distraction away from the issue, you have been distracted. You are the one who has taken the bait, and it's just very funny to see these tired and repetitive arguments from the left. It was like every single one of them just was repeating the same exact line, and I found it just funny and tired.
Yeah, no, I saw a good post on X that equated, the left is now using climate change the way like a 7-year-old uses the dog ate my homework, right? It's the bogeyman that you can just blame when you're actually responsible for something. I'm sorry, fire management is uniquely terrible in California. California is very prone to wildfires, first and foremost, but we have solved a lot of these problems already, right? Fire management, controlled burns, having sufficient water, you name it. This is a failure of state capacity. And I worked for Ron DeSantis, and I got to see, and I was working for him during, I think it was one of the hurricanes, maybe Hurricane Idalia. I was working for Governor DeSantis, as was my wife. I got to see firsthand the Emergency Operations Center, the enormous investments that the state of Florida has made in hurricane preparedness, and it's a very mature organization in the same way that they often deal with these hurricanes, so they know what to do. The executive office of DeSantis, when there's a hurricane, it's like a switch flips, and all of a sudden you get this super aggressive, intense cadence of the way his office works. And the resources that are brought to bear on the problem in Florida are enormous. That's why, even though we can't constantly get hit with hurricanes there, generally people recover, and nobody really complains about the government response ever, because it's as good as it can be.
Yeah.
California doesn't even do that. It's a failure of state capacity. And, it's a deep irony that the party that talks about how, Republicans don't invest in good governance or whatever, or that we're just super libertarian, they can't get their own act together in California to actually handle their own natural disasters, which should be their primary focus. Meanwhile, Florida is just a masterclass, and Florida is doing it without a state income tax, right? Florida is taking in much less revenue per capita than California, and yet is still getting much better results. People get much more bang for their governmental buck, for things that we all think that government is there for: natural disaster relief, preparedness. It's really embarrassing. And, I'm from California. It's very sad. I lived in LA. I know these areas that are currently under, I have friends who are losing their homes. It's a tragedy. You look at the overview of Pacific Palisades, which is just a lovely neighborhood, or was rather, set over the Pacific Ocean, beautiful mid-century modern homes, a pearl of our country architecturally. It looks like Gaza. It looks like it was obliterated. It looks like Hiroshima. It's really tragic.
It's absolutely tragic. And I don't know when the finger pointing on this is going to stop and the recovery is actually going to take place, but I think that there will be some major self-reflection happening in California, and I hope it really comes to hit Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom square between the eyes, because they deserve a lot of blame for this. If they want, the moniker of those titles, they need to carry the weight of the office.
Yeah, I mean, it really is unthinkable that Karen Bass would be in Ghana, like across the world, and not home for this. And it's, similar to hurricanes, like fire risk is pretty predictable.
Yeah.
Like there were NWS warnings like 5 days before this all started, like serious fire risk coming in the next week. You should be here. I mean, what is Karen Bass doing in Ghana? She's the mayor of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Like
exactly.
go home.
Exactly.
Like book a flight, go home. This is your job. This is the only thing you're hired to do. And it really, and that's the thing too. Working for Governor DeSantis, like the cadence of the governor's office isn't always, 24/7, right? There are slow periods where there's not a lot going on. The legislature's not in session. He's just doing his normal events, but there's nothing pressing getting the government fully behind, fully involved and working crazy hours. But natural disasters are it. When everybody else needs to take time off for the natural disasters because they can't get into work, government goes into overdrive, or should, and be like raring to go, everybody working all hours. And Karen Bass is in Ghana.
What? Yeah, I can't see Ron DeSantis taking an international trip during hurricane season.
Right. No, he would avoid it like crazy, right? Like, in wildfire season is predictable. If he was told that a hurricane was coming, he'd come home. Like, even if it didn't pan out, like if he's told, like, Governor, there's a pretty good chance of a hurricane hitting in the next week, he's coming home immediately. Like, we're coming home. We're going to get the emergency response center going, get everything, cranking up, and, state of emergency declaration, get all the linemen arranged. What happened here, guys? Like, fires are not new. This is not a new problem in California.
No, it's not. And what a shame. But I pray that the people recover and that we're able to help the people of California build back. The people, of North Carolina as well. Hope they're not forgotten in the midst of this. But yeah, I know that it feels like President Trump not only had his work already cut out for him, but now it's going to be even tougher. But Will, thank you so much for spending some time with me here this afternoon. What actions are active on your website right now? What can people be doing to be part of the solutions for some of the problems we talked about?
Well, right now, I think I mentioned this earlier, but article3project.org, and that's article 3, numeral 3, project.org. We have an action center. And if you go to the action center, you can, with a few clicks, email your senator to demand that they confirm a number of President Trump's nominees. And that's really important, like letting your senators know and keeping the pressure on that regard, letting them know that you expect them, especially if you're in a state like Louisiana where you have Republican senators, you expect them to vote to confirm President Trump's nominees, that he's entitled to his team, that even if the senator might not have chosen that person himself, it doesn't matter. Like, your job is to confirm his qualified nominees. That's the most important thing you can do in the short term to be involved in national politics. There will be more coming. I'm sure there are plenty more confirmation fights to come, and Article 3 Project will be there fighting to get all of President Trump's nominees confirmed.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Will. And you're at Will Chamberlain on X as well.
That's
follow
right.
you here. Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us today on the State of Freedom. Be sure and check out the show notes for this episode. You can always go there and find the calls to action and resources mentioned in the show, and you can find out more information about our advertisers there as well. If you want to learn more about us or support our work, visit freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org. We'll see you next time. God bless. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks for having me.